metadata management practices or strategy. Any tips or observations there that'd be helpful?
I would say this is a great resource for people who are interested in all aspects of eDiscovery. And I'm not just doing this because Craig's been in the audience, but he does an E Evidence Workbook that he updates every year because he teaches a class at UT. He covers all aspects of eDiscovery, and I think he's got, if I remember, something like 30, 40 some odd pages of stuff about metadata, the basics of learning about hashing, system and application metadata. He talks about EXIF data, geolocation data on photos, stuff like that. And he also talks about digital forensics. So really a lot of that dovetails in. CraigBall.com, and it's E Evidence Workbook. That's one of the best resources for understanding metadata there is. Learning more about forensics and some of the aspects of the data underlying all the files and data we see is something that I think is always worth looking at from that standpoint. I cover stories about metadata. Obviously, I covered one about Princess Kate. This was before we knew that she had a cancer diagnosis, but she published that picture, and it was definitely a red letter day for geeks like us when Harper's Bazaar has in the title the metadata of the picture. That was wild. I think metadata is becoming a term everybody knows about. And I think Craig's workbook is one of the best guides to that.
Any recommendations or observations on privilege logging tools or practices?
From a practice standpoint, there is a Sedona Conference privilege guide that I think we were just talking about it yesterday or on EDRM's case law webinar. I believe it's still in public comment, but Judge Peck, who I think's been involved in that, says they've hardly gotten any comments, and I think it's just about to be finalized. But that's absolutely a good resource from a resource standpoint. EDRM has a resource they published a year and a half ago, something like that. They have a resource where they've talked about privilege logging, and especially talking about categorical privilege logs, which as we're getting larger and larger collections with larger and larger sets of data, potential documents that might be classified as privilege, categorical privilege logs, and some best practices for that. We covered 3 cases yesterday, I think, that involve privilege logs. It's all over the case law, so certainly keep an eye out for that. Both eDiscovery Today, I cover cases regularly that we learn some best practices or some things not to do. And then, of course, Kelly Twigger, your guest last month, her case of the week, she covers cases regularly and sometimes those issues as well. So those are some of the resources I would point to in terms of that, because I think they're really probably the best source, those recommendations of how you go about privilege logs. I think the Sedona Conference even gets into some of the information that should be in the privilege log to really hopefully help provide that level of specificity that might reduce arguments about it.
Doug, we're shifting to a few rapid fire questions here. So first, tell me about your first project in lit support.
That was a large litigation where we worked on a couple of different aspects of it, but one aspect of it was a fairly large attorney work product database. And we used a product called InMagic, eventually got renamed, and I think it's no longer around in any form. But that was an interesting project because there was so much going on that they were keeping track of all the work product and all the schedules and what have you. Another aspect that I mentioned on that project was that we had developed a computer-assisted microfilm retrieval solution where you would query the database to get identified documents to be retrieved or produced, and you would feed it into the program, and it would tell you which microfilm reader printer cartridges to go load up. You'd go load up and spool them out, and there were marks on the pages to indicate what pages they were, and then you would say go, and it would go on to the pages and print them out with microfilm reader printer. It was way cool when it worked, because sometimes
when it worked
as well as we'd liked it, but it was the best technology we had at the time. And a lot of people these days probably don't even remember microfilm or microfiche, but yeah, it was important back then.
That's neat. So you led the team for EDRM gathering metrics for more than 2 years, I believe. So what did you learn? What did that team do? What were you focused on?
I didn't lead the team, but I was on the team. Actually, Greg Buckles was one of the team leaders. I don't think anybody knows it or is aware of it, but we did actually create an EDRM metrics model I don't think much went anywhere with it, but I think probably metrics, especially when we talk about an eDiscovery, people focusing on things like business intelligence and really using a lot more with the data and what have you. I think metrics is more important than ever. I would love to see a metrics initiative really get back and revved up and maybe start to do some standardization type things there at EDRM. We had a lot of fun with it. We did put together a model that we were proud of, but things change and it's probably no longer a model that would be as applicable as it used to be.